What would it be like to be promised to a man you've never met before you could even walk? Back in medieval Europe, that wasn't even a question. It was just how things were. For most women in the Middle Ages, marriage wasn't about love or personal choice. It was a deal, a binding contract decided by family interests, social status, and money. For noble families, daughters were like political pawns, traded like assets to form alliances, grow territories, or keep the peace. Girls could be promised off young. Kids as young as 7, and by the time they hit 12, they were seen as old enough to get married under church law. Back in 1270, a legal expert named Guillaume Durand straight up said, "Marriage isn't about love, it's about property and law." And for peasant girls, choosing who they married wasn't really an option. The Lord's approval usually mattered more than what the girl wanted, and marriages were often set up to benefit the feudal system rather than the family. Even though the church said consent was needed, it was mostly just a formality. A young girl surrounded by male relatives and clergy expected women to obey no matter how scared or resistant they were. Historian Eileen Power, looking at court and church records, found lots of cases where women were forced into marriage or later said they never agreed to it. Some were grabbed by force, others threatened, and many just had no say in the decision made for them. Once married, a woman basically lost all independence. Legally, she became femme couverte, meaning her legal identity was covered by her husband's. A woman's identity basically became her husband's. She couldn't own property on her own, take someone to court, or even leave the house without his permission. In England, the Magna Carta didn't give women any rights, and church law kept men in charge, quoting Genesis, "Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." In this harsh setup, marriage was like a prison disguised as a sacred bond. Love wasn't something people looked for or even expected. Women, especially young girls, were traded, tied down, and often forgotten. Before they really understood what marriage was all about, childbirth was a silent killer for women. In medieval Europe, having a baby wasn't a happy occasion, it was a deadly risk. For many women, it was the most dangerous thing they'd ever go through. Without anesthesia, antiseptics, or skilled doctors, giving birth was a harsh and uncertain experience. Women usually had their babies at home, helped by midwives who had hands-on experience, but little formal training. Even noble women faced these serious dangers. It's shocking. For peasants whose lives were tough and bodies worn out from constant hard work and poor nutrition, the risks were even higher. The death rates say it all. Some estimates show that between 1 in 10 and 1 in 12, moms died giving birth. Problems like blocked labor, heavy bleeding, fever after birth, and infections often ended in death. There were no C-sections for women who were still alive. If a C-section was done, it was only to save the baby after the mother had already died. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess and medical writer, described childbirth in stark, harsh terms. When a woman gave birth, her life was hanging by a thread. If she lost her strength, she was gone, and many did. Without any knowledge of germs, hygiene was terrible. Midwives reused their tools, and even noble women gave birth in filthy conditions, sometimes in rooms scattered with straw, full of bacteria. On top of the physical danger, there was the spiritual fear. The church taught that dying and giving birth without confessing your sins could put your soul in danger. Sometimes priests were called to a woman in labor not to celebrate, but to give last rites. Still, women kept having child after child. Marriage was all about having kids, and a woman's status, and even her chance at salvation, often depended on her fertility. Noble women might go through 10 or more pregnancies trying to have a son. The English Queen and Neville, Richard III's wife died in 1485, probably from tuberculosis made worse by complications from childbirth. That was her fate. Not at all rare. Every birth could mean death, but there was no other option. Back in medieval times, being a mother was just expected, and staying alive was never certain. Harsh punishments, the grim truth about medieval justice. Justice back then was quick, cruel, and ruthless, especially towards women. In a world where laws came from feudal traditions, church rules, and male dominance, punishments weren't about fixing people. They were meant to scare. Women weren't held to the same standards as men. Although laws in many kingdoms, like England's common law or France's customary codes, were supposed to apply to everyone, they were enforced in a way that clearly favored men. Women accused of moral or personal offenses often faced much harsher punishments. Adultery, promiscuity, or even just being suspected of immodesty could lead to public shaming, physical punishment, or worse. In the 13th century, English records show women found guilty of adultery being marched through the streets, wearing only their smocks, with their heads shaved, while people jeered at them. Crowds gathered. Harsher punishments led to even crueler outcomes. For theft, people often had body parts cut off, ears, fingers, or their faces branded. Women usually got hit harder because of the extra shame attached. In 1324, a woman in Paris named Jeanne de Brigue, known as a fortune teller, was burned alive for alleged witchcraft and theft. Her being a woman was seen as part of her natural dishonesty. The church ran its own courts, especially for moral crimes. Women accused of fornication, blasphemy, or heresy were hauled in front of them. Church judges rarely showed mercy.